Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting, this March 13th meeting of the Rockingham County School Board to order. The first item on our agenda is to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McWelkin. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Oh, motion carries unanimous. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you're able, please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. And please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. We'll now move into our public comment segment, and we have one speaker on the public comment list for tonight. I would like to take a moment to remind everybody that we do have a 3-minute time limit, and at 30 seconds, 2 tones will sound to let you know that you're down to 30 seconds to speak, and at 3 minutes, we'll ask you to stop speaking and a chime will play. Also, please keep in mind that all comments should be directed to the board as a whole, and that they should follow our pillars of character. Okay, our only presenter for tonight is Patrick Fritz from Broadway.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Board. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. First, I just have a question to see if there's been any resolution on the email I sent to the board about telehealth. And I know I've kind of talked with Dr. Scheichel about it via email, and I believe y'all were copied on that. I just wonder if there was any movement on it. The other thing I'd like to discuss is kind of what I brought up last week or at the last meeting about the weekday religious education and the vetting of those people that we're releasing our children to from our public schools, where we have vetting processes in place and allowing them to go off school property during the school day with who? I went further back into some research, and I kind of looked some things up because there's been a lot of talk about predation of children and certain groups and grooming and whatnot. So I'd really like to kind of point out a few things that I found during my research. I'm just going to kind of go through some names here. We got Jay Strickland, 2 counts of sexual abuse, 1 count of forced sodomy against a child. Mark Davis, a youth pastor, 6 counts of sexual abuse of a minor. Timothy Mann, 1 count of sex abuse of a minor, inappropriate sexual contact with a child. Ralph Aaron, 152 counts of sodomy, sex abuse, torture, possession of child porn. Louis Garcia, 3 counts of sex abuse of girls ages 6, 7, and 8 years old. Charles Adcock, 29 counts of rape and sodomy. Dan Acker, 8 counts of sex abuse of a minor. Gary Smitherman, sex abuse of a child under 12 years old. All of these are youth ministers. All of them are youth ministers that we have given authority over our children, right? None of these are these boogeymen in the closet. These are people that are setting up on every corner in our town. Every corner in our town, every corner in our county, every corner in the city. These are youth ministers that have gotten away with abusing children with impunity for decades. And these are all evangelical ministers. This isn't even touching the Catholic Church sex abuse. Further, as I was going deeper into the research, 60% of these churches have foreign ministries in developing countries where they have gone down and groomed these children. I am incredibly concerned about the fact that we're letting our children off of school property into the hands of these predators with absolutely no vetting. When I ask the school who these people are, they say, we don't know. So who are these people that we are allowing our children to leave school grounds with?
Thank you, Mr. Fritz. That concludes our public comment for tonight. We're going to move into highlights by board members. We're going to start with Mr. Cross.
Thank you. I appreciate, I don't have much tonight. That was quite the show here tonight. I can assure the public there's no concern with our WRE teachers within the county. They go through a background check as well. We don't have a problem in Rockingham County with youth ministers having sex with children and all the accounts that our speaker said tonight. So that's a good thing. Does it happen within all religions? I would say yes. But to the public, there's no concern with our WRE teachers. And so it's quite the show. Good to be back. It's an honor to be here on the board for this coming year. Looking forward to the superintendent search and the whole process we're going down. I want to thank again Ms. Lohr and Ms. McQuilkin for everything that you guys have been doing through this whole process. It's been a good process, so thank you. And I'll pass on tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Falk? Thank you, Mr. Falk. Mr. Breeden?
Thank you, Chair Lohr. I have been trying to recognize some people as I wind down this process who have been helpful to me, and I'm sure that I know that I'm just absolutely sure I'm going to forget more than I mention. But before I do that, I wanted to take a moment to remember Bonnie Downey, a longtime McGahkeesville Elementary teacher who courageously fought, but tragically lost her battle with cancer. There aren't many people that you meet in this life that every experience that you've had with them has been pleasant and inspiring. And I can say that about Miss Downey. So I just hope that God's peace is with her family, and remember all the great things that she did, not only for my kids, but for thousands of kids throughout her career. With that being said, I wanted to thank two people tonight publicly who are here, who have been extremely helpful to me throughout my boardsmanship, or most of it. One is Cheryl Mast. Thank you for putting up with me all these years asking those questions. And Dr. Aldifer as well. Doug has been a friend throughout the time he was in Elkton and in transportation and as assistant superintendent, and I've had just some great conversations with him over the last couple of years. So, and there are so many more. And if I don't mention you, it's not because I don't feel that you've been helpful. It's just there are so many. So, thank you all for all that you do. Thank you all for being here tonight on a spring break night, and we're glad to have you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Breeden. Dr. McQuilkin?
Thank you, Ms. Moore. First of all, I'd like to say the high school musicals continue. The four high schools had their musicals, and I know we attended those, and now we're into the middle schools. Pence Middle Schools was last weekend, and the other three middle schools and an elementary school will be held soon. So we're looking forward to going to the musicals. We thank the students and the teachers and the community who support and help to put these musicals on. It's a great endeavor. Second highlight is the Teacher of the Year for Rockingham County is Lisa Rushley from Mountain View, and we congratulate Lisa, but we also congratulate all the teachers of the year from each of the buildings, and they were recognized a couple weeks ago, and we appreciate the fact that they were selected, and congratulations to all. My third highlight is that I read to 4 classes of students at Cub Run and look forward to reading to at least 2 more schools in the coming weeks. And lastly, but not least, the superintendent search update. When we were here in the last meeting in February 27th, we had the 2 associates with BWP, Kevin Kastner and Wayne Harris, who came and presented their compilation of a profile with input from the people, all the people who wish to come to the forums, to the people who participated in the surveys, to other school staff and people from the community who participated. And now that that has been accomplished, that we have a leadership profile, applications are formally open and have been being received. I talked to Dr. Kastner, and he said they're coming along, and applications for the superintendent for Rockingham County Schools will close on March 31st. So I wanted everybody to know that thereafter, we would shortly be meeting with Kevin Kastner and Wayne Harris and taking a look at who has applied for our school division. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. I'll go next because I want to piggyback on part of what Dr. McQuilkin said. Yes, we had our wonderful High School Musicals and one Footloose at Wilbur Pence already, and there's still a couple more to go, so we're looking forward to that. But while kids were doing musical, they were also competing and preparing for all-state choir and band. And we have a number of students that made All-State. Emily Elliott, Seth Emmerich, Darren Mahoney, Kylie Shirk, Avery Tewalt, Andre Garcia, Aiden Cahill, Eddie McGill, Reese Mills, Heather Pageant, Michael Wingfield, Aaron Yo, Macy I, Emily McAvoy, and Camden Kyle was a middle school student that made All-State. So we're super proud of all those folks. And then I personally got to judge in the area FFA public speaking contest, and we had a number of students that did really well there and are moving on to the state contest in June. Katie Payne was the winner for Extemporaneous from Broadway High School. I forget, I judged Extemporaneous and Creed, and I believe the Creed speaker wasn't from Rockingham County, and I forget, I apologize, but I think Broadway also had the winner in prepared public speaking. But that was an amazing event. Our young people are definitely learning poise. They're better at public speaking than I am, I can tell you that. And then I was able to go to the FFA Parliamentary Procedure Contest, the state contest held on Friday, and they get meetings done in 8 minutes. They have 8 minutes to do a whole meeting. I think it's 8 minutes. It's a really short time period. So that's going to be my goal for moving forward. We're going to try to get these minutes done as quickly and as efficiently as the FFA students. But they did an amazing job. And we had 3 county schools participating in that: J. Frank Hilliard, Wilbur Pence, and Broadway High School. And Broadway placed second. So I'm super proud of them. And those are my highlights for the week. Dr. Scheich.
My highlights will at least take 8 minutes, so I don't think you're going to be successful. And of course, we're already 15 minutes in, so. No, many of the highlights have already been mentioned. Musicals, then also had a chance at Elkton Elementary and Riverbend to read to students. That's always a highlight. They have book competitions, March Madness. Our DECA students did a fantastic job in Virginia Beach. And then, of course, Teacher of the Year celebration. And so I'll do my best to do this in just 2 or 3 minutes, but I will list the Teachers of the Year. Martha Maddox, Natalie at Broadway High School, Natalie McCready at East Rock, Tabitha Daniel at MTC, Beth Webb at Spotswood, Erin Wetzel at Turner Ashby, Scott Benton at Elkton Middle, John Welsh at J. Frank Hilliard, Gretchen Blinko at Montevideo Middle School, Ruthie Beck at Wilbur S. Pence, Rick Brigman at Cub Run, April Buckmaster, Elkton Elementary, Cassie Smith, Folks Run Elementary, Holly Basil, John C. Myers, Katie Long at John Wayland, Jessica Ireland, Lacey Spring, Hunter Messick at Linville Edom, Brittany Lewis at McGackiesville, Lisa Reshley at Mountain View, and as Dr. McQuilkin said, she also was selected as the Rockingham County Teacher of the Year. Desiree Brubaker at Audubon Elementary, Lauren Pergerson, Peakview, Gregory Conway, Plains, Lindsay Brown, Pleasant Valley, Lauren Bunch at Riverbend, and Stephanie Werman at South River Elementary School. So many amazing people, and in their philosophy statements, you could tell this is about building positive relationships with students and making sure that all students are welcome and feel safe in their classrooms. And that's the prerequisite for learning, because until that is taken care of, the mind doesn't engage in the higher order thinking activities. So many of them really talked about that, and it was great to hear, and congratulations to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I looked it up. It was Lauren Armstrong in Creed from Turner Ashby, and in Prepared, I had it here. There it is, sorry. It was Allie Phillips from Broadway. So congratulations to those folks. This concludes the highlights by board members. We'll now move into action items. The first item on that we have for action tonight is to approve the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Breeden. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, we'll vote. All those in favor of to approve the minutes of the February 27th, the February 27th, 2023 meeting as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. And I'll try to get back in the current millennia and not in the 1900s. The next item that we have are the bills and mileage.
Board members, you have received bills and mileage for February 2023, and I recommend approval of those.
I move that we follow the superintendent's recommendation to approve the February bills as presented.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Falk. Is there any discussion on the bills? Hearing none, we'll vote on the superintendent's recommendation to approve the February bills as presented. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carried unanimously. Next item on the agenda is field trips. Dr. Scheichel.
Board members, you have 2 field trips for your approval tonight. Broadway High School FBLA Leadership Competition, March 31st through April 2nd, 8 to 13 students to Reston, Virginia, and Turner Ashby High School Model General Assembly, April 16 through 18, 5 students to Richmond, Virginia, and I recommend approval of those field trips.
Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. Do we have a motion? Thank you, Mr. Cross. Do we have a second? Thank you, Mr. Falk. Is there any discussion regarding the field trips? Hearing none, we'll vote on the motion to follow the superintendent's recommendation to approve the field trips. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the school calendar. I believe we're going to have Mr. Shiflett come.
Good evening, Chair Lohr, members of the board, Dr. Scheichel. At the February 27th school board meeting, a draft 23-24 school calendar was shared with the school board members as an informational item. And the school board at the meeting made a request to revisit that draft and do a comparison to some of our days off, teacher work days, specifically to some of the federal holidays. And based on that revision or that review, 2 revisions were made to the calendar. One was we moved the October 13th PLC Day to October 9th, so it coincides with Columbus Day and Indigenous People Day. And then the other was to move March 8th PLC to March 5th, because that is the presidential primary election. And many of our schools, maybe 7 or 8, are used as polling places. And so that makes it a lot nicer when it's a teacher work day, we don't have schools in session. February 19th presents a little bit of a dilemma. That is President's Day, but there was a lot of expressed interest from teachers, administrators, and even some parents that they would like to have that parent conference
to follow the Super Bowl, which is February the 12th. So Super Bowl, President's Day, I went with the Super Bowl. But if you choose that you would like to do differently, I would be more than happy to make those changes. But this is the draft, and I would seek approval of that for next school year if it pleases you.
Thank you.
I do recommend approval of the revised draft A calendar for the 23-24 school year.
Thank you, Dr. Scheichel. Do I have a recommendation, or do I have a motion?
I move that we accept the revised calendar as presented this evening by Dr. Shiflett.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Do we have a second? Thank you, Mr. Falk. Is there any discussion?
As I said to Dr. Shiflett, I think that the day after the Daytona 500 would be better than the Super Bowl, but who am I to nitpick?
Thankfully, we didn't have to worry about the World Cup final this time because that wasn't over the holiday break.
Yeah, well, I'm not, March Madness starts this Thursday and Friday. I don't know if that's just coincidental or what.
And we've got spring break. It's like you guys have really put a lot of thought and planning into this, but you have really put a lot of thought and planning into this, and I really appreciate it. I think there's no one perfect calendar. And quite frankly, I work 365 days a year. So if you can get some time off for me in my calendar, that would truly be miracle work. But I think you guys have done an excellent job on this one. And my preference, I don't know about the rest of the board, my preference is to stick with Super Bowl and having those days after the Super Bowl instead of President's Day. I mean, who gets those days off, right? Where I think a lot of people like to stay up late for the Super Bowl, but I'm working regardless. Is there any discussion? We ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor, let me get of accepting the revised calendar as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The calendar passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes our action items segment for the meeting. We're going to move on to informational items, and we have the budget discussion by Dr. Scheichel.
Members of the board and members of the public, our budget discussion this year is a little bit unique. We have the General Assembly in the second year of the biennium. Typically, that's less of a contentious budget process, but we're currently facing a significant difference between the different versions that would have an enormous impact on school funding. And as we're going through this process, I wanted to make sure, after conversations too with board members individually, that I talk a little bit about the different options that that we may face, and seek some guidance, as we prepare for our school board budget. That I will present the superintendent's recommendation later this month, and then we'll present to the Board of Supervisors in April. And it's important to understand that it's likely that even with a delayed presentation to the Board of Supervisors, we will not have a final budget from Richmond yet. So that's certainly concerning, but we've worked through different options to make sure that we can have a balanced budget, but there are some decisions to be made. And so tonight, I'll give you an overview of where we are with those different pieces, and then ask you to, just again, maybe have a conversation around these options and to get maybe a preference, on how we should approach this, because we do have options. So last year, the General Assembly passed and then was signed by the governor budget legislation that covers 2 years, so fiscal years 23, which we're currently in, and then fiscal year 24, so that second year of the biennium. And because of increased sales tax revenue and a number of other available revenue at the state level, and a mistake that happened at the Department of Education where someone basically made a small formula error in a spreadsheet to the tune of $200 million. There were a number of conversations in the General Assembly about that and other items that would affect the current year's budget. And so because the House and Senate versions were so different, the conference committee basically decided to only deal with the fiscal year 23 piece at this point. So there were some decisions made that no school division, for example, would have less money than they were told last June. And so there's a small hold harmless piece in there for the school divisions that would have happened for. We weren't one of those. And so that because of that calculation error, there were some corrections made there. And so for the current year, we're fine. There's not really, it's simply going to be, some extra money there, but it's not really at a significant level. Where we really do face the bigger numbers and the discrepancies is for the fiscal year 24 budget. So typically, we do see a difference when budgets are created in the House and in the Senate. There's different political control. The Republicans hold the House, Senate is controlled by the Democrats. So you expect there to be some differences. And typically, we try to stay, fairly conservative with our estimate, but the difference is usually one where you can say, well, worst case scenario, the lower one comes, and it doesn't make that much of a difference. But this year, as Ms. Mast outlined last time, the difference is 5.1 million. And so that's a huge difference. We don't know which version that is going to be, and 5.1 million is a major difference. And so especially because they couldn't agree on anything on a final version, and there is some talk that the budget enrichment may not be done until June potentially, which is even later than you normally have in these difficult first year of the biennium conversations. We'll have to make some guesses, some educated guesses, but also set priorities in terms of where we want to come in originally and what we then would do if there's some adjustment. It's very rare that if there is a difference, that one of the two chambers completely gets it their way. There's a lot of negotiation. It's important to remember, too, that the Commonwealth has significant revenue surplus, so in the neighborhood of $3.5 billion. The governor has indicated, that he wants a $1 billion tax cut. So there are conversations around huge numbers. And so we have to keep that in mind. There's a lot of negotiation going on. The difference really between the two versions of the budget, the House and Senate version, comes down to two major pieces. So the Senate has a retention bonus for staff, for SOQ positions for the fiscal year 24. So at the beginning of the year, those who come back to work, basically, who we retain for next year, there would be I think the total is $1.2 million in terms of bonus money. And then the other big item would be the support cap. So in 2008, and again, Ms. Mast explained a little bit about that last time she was here. In 2008, during the economic downturn, the Great Recession, the state had to save money. And so there was a cap placed on support positions. So you have behavior specialists or clerical staff, or you have counselors. And so there was a limit on how many positions the state would pay for. And even though the economic situation in Virginia has improved dramatically since 2008, that support cap was never really lifted. And so school divisions have staff, but they have to be funded locally, fully, many of those positions. And so for the last few years, there has really been a push to say, the drastic measures that were needed in 2008, they're not needed anymore. And so that support cap should be lifted, should go back to the ratios that existed in 2008. And if that were to be lifted, the difference for Rockham County would be about $3 million. And this is ongoing money. So this would be $3 million annually. And so that's where the big numbers come from. Again, there's no timeline for the final budget. Some legislators have indicated it might be June. But when we talk about the support cap, That's a big chunk. There was some conversation early on whether the General Assembly would hold school divisions harmless for the calculation tool error. That would be a little bit lower than that if they just said, oh, DOE made a mistake, but we're going to give you that money anyway. The money would certainly be there, but I think the support cap is a more elegant approach if they decide to do that, because it would provide money that really, based on the economic situation, I think can be justified, that those restrictions from 2008 shouldn't be there anymore, and that should say support cap as a typo in there. So what are the possibilities? One possibility, and that's unlikely, but one possibility would be that they simply don't do anything, right? Because a budget was passed last year for 2 years. And so that second year of the biennium, a budget sits there. And if the House and Senate don't do anything, that's what would be the budget that's in place. Now, the reason that's unlikely is because in the budget, again, everyone has certain items that they want. Governor Youngkin wants $1 billion tax cut. The Democrats in the Senate, they want that support cap lifted. There is talk of, conversations around, supporting a tax cut if it's in combination with some of these other things, especially given the enormous surplus in revenue at the state level. But that would basically mean a $4.7 million increase for RCPS if nothing is done. The House version is pretty similar if you use the 5% compensation supplement, so 5% pay increase for SOQ positions. And again, in Rockingham County, we don't just give that 5% to the positions that are in the standards of quality, but with the 5% increase, that would be $4.8 million, so very close to what the budget would be that was passed last year, because there's some adjustments, for one, the calc tool error, but also membership has changed and so on, and a few others. If the House version were approved with a 7% raise, because again, there were discussions whether the compensation supplement should be 5% or 7%, that would then increase our revenue by $5.9 million. And then again, if the Senate version were to be approved, that would be an increase of $11 million. Again, it is likely that there will be some compromise, but we don't know what that may be. And so what we have to work with, because we don't know, is the lower number. Again, in a normal process where you say, oh, they're $1.5 million apart, we can maybe go a little bit above that, but this difference is so big and it's based on two major items that it's not really clear what we will face in terms of state revenue. So what are these issues that we're facing as a result? The school board will be asked to approve an RCPS budget on the 29th. And then Rockingham County will receive the budget presentation, and Rockingham County will approve a budget. And all of these things will likely happen before state revenue is really final. And that's a little bit unusual, again, especially in the second year. And for us, what that means is we will need to issue contracts for next year, and then state revenue may come in later, and so we have to be very, very careful. You certainly don't want to issue contracts and then say, oh, never mind, that 7% raise in your contract is only going to be 5%, right? Because people have signed their contracts. So if anything, you want to go in the opposite direction. So again, as a result, we used a conservative estimate for this discussion and for our balancing process. What is in all versions of it is an expected increase in local funding of about $3 million. That was already in the presentations that Ms. Mast has made, and it's based on conversations we've had with Rockingham County leadership. So that's not a number we just made up. So there are conversations around what the county proposes potentially to increase school funding by, based on local revenue increase. For us, if you think about where are the big numbers in terms of expenditures, because you saw, you might have $5.9 million more in revenue there. One is, just a 5% raise increases our expenses by $5.5 million. If that were a 7% raise, then you have $7.7 million. So these are the big numbers. There isn't, oh, $5.9 million. We have all this stuff we can do now. It goes to raises to a large extent. We also face a health insurance increase. Originally, that was projected to be $2.5 million. There's been a discussion at the county level to split that over 2 years so that this year there would be an increase of $1.3 million. That's the employer a portion of the health insurance rate increase. And you also have to remember that with ESSER funding basically being phased out, there's a revenue decrease of $2.2 million. And I do want to say, and again, as with all things finance, Ms. Mast is doing an amazing job with all of this. She is always fully ready when I say, hey, here's the SOOPS memo that I got, to look at those numbers, see what that means for Rockingham County. And when it came to ESSER funds from the very beginning, unlike many other school districts, said, we have to be careful with this. Remember, this is funding that's limited to a few years. Let's make sure we do this in a way that when that money goes away, we're not all of a sudden saying, hey, we have $2.2 million in personnel expenses that we now have to find the money for. We did some things with it, but we're very careful to not count on that in the long run, right? Because then otherwise you're facing this fiscal cliff where you don't know where that money is going to come from. And then you have to tell people, hey, those jobs that we paid for with ESSER funds, that they're not going away. But you'll see there's one item in there, certainly, and that's a high priority for us. That would shift money from what we currently pay for with ESSER funds to local funding. So in the earlier discussions in February, just to show you how we even balance the budget, we left the state revenue pretty much the same at $5.9 million. The $3 million are there for local funding. The raise is the same. But because ultimately there's a $5 million shortfall, right? Because we had so many requests and so many listed expenses with that state revenue, that's just not possible. And so early on, you saw, there's a $5 million shortfall. How do we come up with that money? And so you'll see, again, everywhere we could, we simply said hold funding level, right? Because again, with that funding increase, it's going to go to the across-the-board raise. And so when we look at academic support, for example, there's some things that are still there. JMU graduation, that's simply paying for the 4 high school graduations at JMU. But academic support reduced by about $250,000. Instruction, everyone was told, hey, I know you want some additional money for the language arts program, for science. We'll hold it level. This is how we can, for now, balance the budget. There's some things that are a given. Regional special education programs going to cost an extra $240,000. That's, we don't have much of a choice there. Career coaches, that's a program with Blue Ridge. There's a $50,000 increase there. EL tutor, we're not lowering EL services. There's simply an item in the budget that actually adds EL teachers. And so the reduction in tutoring money is justified there. Division-wide proposals. So this is one that we'll talk about quite a bit in this conversation. The salary adjustment for assistants. So our assistants, our instructional assistants, our schools are in comparison with surrounding school divisions. Their pay needs to go up significantly to be competitive. And that's a big ticket item. Again, in February, we talked about $900,000. What you see here is in order to balance the budget with this $5.9 million and keeping the 7% raise. So if we want to keep the 7% raise, that would have to be put on hold. Now, again, remember that what we're talking about is if the House version makes it, right? So the most conservative estimate. And so what we would likely do in this case is, again, set priorities with the board to say, okay, and everything that comes in above, this would be priority, right? So if there are $3 million more, for example, with the support cap, you can do this on a number of other things. If it's only 1 million, you can say, whatever top priority it is. If we already gave a 7% raise, then the salary adjustment for assistants would be that first thing that goes in. Substitute pay, that's an important initiative to get more subs. We face this consistently. There's always a talk about we don't have enough subs, we don't have enough subs. This is an approach that actually, rather than trying to find people who don't sub in RCPS, to actually get people to sub more who are already here, because it's difficult to find new people, but some subs, may only sub 15 days. And so there's a staggered effort to say, okay, after so many days, there's a bonus. And then after so many more days, there's another small bonus. And so that then encourages people who sub at a certain level to sub more. And I think that's a very promising strategy. And then hourly rates for, from $12 to $13, that's coming statewide anyway, so we're a little bit ahead of that. What we eliminated is the card access system. So we had talked about putting a system to access external doors in our buildings with cards that you swipe. So that would cost $500,000. But again, at this level, that has to go initially. Again, as money becomes available, certainly we can talk about it. Change in ESSER funding, that's the same. There's not really much we can do about that. The internal adjustment, so one of the ways you can get additional revenue is to look at how much money we typically return to Rockingham County at the end of the year. What we call the fund balance. And so again, we've had conversations if we want to do a 7% raise. Our fund balance consistently now is high enough that we can say, let's lower that a little bit. It is not money that the county budgets with. So we can take that down a little bit, and that gives us additional revenue, again, for other projects. So that would be $1.5 million. Maintenance, transportation, again, what are the absolute essentials? We can't say don't buy fuel, but there's some other things that we can say, again, level funding as much as possible. MTC, that's the MTC budget, that's unchanged. Health insurance increase, I said that earlier, rather than $2.5 million, 1.3 million, so all of that helps. Personnel, we pared that down, new personnel requests from $2.5 million to 1.85 million, 1.86 million. And so what that then means is instead of a $5.3 million shortfall, as we talked about in February, now you have a balanced budget with a little bit of room to spare, right? So they're $310,000. So that's how we got from the $5 million shortfall to a balanced budget. Okay. We created actually two versions of the balanced budget, and I think that's where the conversation comes in. So one question that we would ask is, do we go with a 5% raise or do we go with a 7% raise? It's important to remember that there is an impact, right? When we give a 7% raise and the state has that money, right? So if the state says, okay, it's going to be 7, then you get the equivalent of the 7% raise for all the positions that are in the standards of quality. When you only give a 5% raise, you lose some of that money, right? Because then they're only giving you money for the 5%. It's theoretically possible that they'll say, well, if you gave a bigger raise last year, we'll still let you get all the state money for 7, even if you only give 5. But we don't know that, right? That's an unknown, so we can't really budget with that. So in terms of that difference, right? Increase of 2.2 million for a 7% raise. That second one should be 5%. So we need an extra $1 million in additional expenditure reduction for the 7% raise, and that's why that $1 million is pretty much that assistant pay raise that's originally in there. And again, it's important to remember that that's because of we project at that lowest level. And so we do anticipate that we'll have more money, but in order to balance the budget in the budget presentation, we have to make these tough decisions. And so the two options are there. To the left is your 7% option. To the right is your 5% option. Again, you can see that revenue is different, so it's lower if it's a 5% raise, because then the state also provides less money for it. Local revenue would be the same. The raise, again, 7.7 versus 5.5. We left the rest of them that we already pared down the same, but the difference is, again, with a 5% raise, you can give the salary adjustment for assistants. but to balance it, that limits you to a 5% raise. If you go with a 7% raise, of course, that 7% raise also applies to assistants. So 2% of that additional money, would be there. Then you can, at 7%, you can't do that salary adjustment. You just don't have enough funds for that. The rest, again, remains the same. Change in ESSER funding, these are all the same between 5% and 7%. So again, the big difference is more money for the raise in 7%, but you can't do the salary adjustment. And so, again, those are two valid options. Right? If we decide to do a 5% raise and give the salary adjustment, and then additional money comes in to take people to 7, what that means is everyone has to get a new contract too. So you have to send new contracts to everyone when that comes, because they sign a contract for 5%, and then you need a new contract for 7. If we go with a 7% raise, and the first priority becomes the salary adjustment for assistants, so if that then gets put in the budget, if there's that $1 million, then assistants have to sign a new contract because their pay will go up. And that number is below 300, so it's, I think, about 280. So there's a technical aspect to it as well, but it really comes down to where do we draw that line initially. I will say this, there are a number of school divisions that will not be able to do a 7% raise. It would make us more competitive. There was an original proposal in the budget to actually increase teacher pay, for example, by more than 5%, even if only 5% was available. So these are both really important priorities, but with this budget, it really comes down to doing one or the other. Unless, again, I mean, the other increased expenses, we don't really have much of a choice. For example, when it comes to the special education regional program or some of those other items, right? We already cut out pretty much everything that was just discretionary, where we say, oh, that would be nice, that would be good to have. But again, these are the same. Maintenance, certainly, if at all possible. Again, if more money becomes available, maintenance does need more money. A lot of these are just inflationary increases because things just become more and more expensive. Same for transportation, right? So that's the proposed increase. It went from earlier in that first one in February, that increase was, and I'll show the sheet here in just a second, $2.5 million. We've trimmed that down to $1.8 million. So that would be for next school year. And when you look at what these are, so here is the personnel increases, right? So those are expenses that go into the classroom. The big ticket item that you see at the bottom, so there's a 49 part-time teacher assistants. That's the one that's currently funded with ESSER. And so we increased 49 assistants in part to support our reading program. We made 49 assistants full-time from part-time. So this is the one item where you'd say, okay, if we don't do that because ESSER is going away, yes, you could save $600,000, but you'll be telling 49 classroom assistants that the elementary schools have strongly advocated for in terms of remaining full-time. You have to tell them, okay, you're going back to part-time, right? That's 600,000 enrollment positions. Those are positions that will be needed because of enrollment in different classes at the elementary level, shifting class numbers where you have to add a third grade teacher somewhere because the expected numbers would move us above our class size limits. And then one behavior assistant for the elementary schools. And if I go from bottom to top, TLC teachers, TLC assistant, EL teachers, that's what I was talking about earlier, that the reduction in tutoring is more than made up by adding 3 EL teacher, half-time art and music teacher, reading teacher. The 17,000-hour admin interns actually work, because there's work to be done in the summer. They're currently paid on a 10-month schedule, but they really do work 11 months. And that's a fairly small adjustment. Speech pathologist, and then SPED teachers and SPED assistants. So Those are the positions. The one that you don't see a number at, those are the ones we eliminated for now, right? So that would be, again, that conversation around if the House and Senate Conference Committee decides to find a compromise, let's just say that is $2 million, right? Then the decision becomes, okay, in what order do you place those things back, right? Assistant pay raise, $1 million, then what comes next, right? And so I think these are those are the staffing positions that are on both sides, because these are needed and they would be difficult to eliminate. And so, again, I think the big discussion is around where these priorities lie, right? Is that a 5% raise across the board, 7% raise across the board? What do we do with that impact, of course, for assistance? And are there particular priorities then if more money does become available, right? Where should we then put that money? Certainly, the board's decision, right? There are certainly other things in here. If you say, you know what, we don't want the additional 3 EL teachers, certainly there's money there. But in our estimation, those would have, we left the ones in there that have the most direct impact on classrooms.
The two in there for HR, the human resources.
No, there's no number right next to that. So that's just to show you what was in the original budget, and so those are not in there. So the changes there are human resource assistant, HR supervisor, behavior specialist for secondary, a truancy supervisor, and then some stipend additions, and 3.25 clerical positions. So those are no longer in there. That's the difference between the 2.5 million and the 1.8. Yeah, good question. And in these, you know, when you talk about central office positions, of course, we are very careful, right? Because that's always a touchy subject. I would say that the truancy and attendance position, the original number we had in there is not really the actual cost, because we put in what it would cost to hire a supervisor, but there are changes in other positions that would pay for part of that. So, and again, you know, truancy is a big issue, and so of those, that's probably the one that we would discuss. But again, that's a matter of in what order, right? So it all depends on how much money ultimately comes from Richmond.
Dr. Scheichel, on our summary of, as of February 15th, we had 3,580,500 for salary adjustments for the, what's it? So why that, can you talk more
Yeah,
about
there's
that
some
number? Why it changed?
additional salary adjustments that, are no longer, if you go to the 7% raise, right, there was an adjustment to the teacher scale, for example. If it was 5%, then there was a plan to add on for teachers. That was one of the elements. There were some other adjustments for administrators. There were some additional salary adjustments that we had in there. But going to 7% actually takes care of a lot of that. And it also, that's why even the additional funds for the assistance changes, because, you know, if you go from 5% to 7%, then the first 2% of that adjustment for assistance is already in that 7% raise. And so that lowers the number a little bit for what's actually needed to get assistance to that final percentage, which would be significant. It would be, I believe, 19%.
Thank you.
Talk a couple of obvious things here, Dr. Scheichel. Some people ask, why do we turn money back to the Board of Supervisors at the end of the year? And that we are bound by law to not deficit spend. So therefore, we are required to, and if we can get Cheryl and the superintendent to budget within 2-3%, that's amazing in this size budget. And so I think discussions with the Board of Supervisors, as has been going on for years, is a good thing to do about that fund balance. The other obvious thing is that we are a people business, and the vast majority of our budget is in investment in people. And to cut means you either pay those people less, which puts you in the negative side of recruitment and retention, or you cut out the number of people that you employ, which we're talking about the people that are responsible for our kids, right? In one capacity or another. And so a large part of that budget, the vast majority of it, is in purchasing the services of trained professionals. Could you or Ms. Mass talk about, so much of our budget is designated. We're told how we're to use money. And I know that's changed over the years that I have served. But of the total amount of state money, for example, that we get, roughly what percentage does the school board have that we can maneuver? Is that a proper term to use? I don't want to say play with, because that's not what we do, but monies that we can maneuver. I know it used to just be, I think, basic aid. But any comments on that?
I don't know if you have a percentage for that, but it's, a lot of state funding is tied. So for example, big items like the compensation supplement, right? The expectation is you give a raise with that, right? So you can't just shift it around, but there is basic aid.
A little bit less than half of our state funding. So, and that's probably all that's really not specifically tied. But I would also say that about 80% of our whole budget is tied to personnel. So if you're not wanting to lay off people, we're only talking 20% of our budget that's even available. And then, of course, of that 20%, you start taking out utilities and new buses, we're down to a small number.
And that's where I was going with this, is that when you look at a budget the size of Rockingham County Public Schools, and people say, well, why can't you find X million dollars? Well, a large part of it, that translates into laying people off, or not giving raises, and then of the piece that you have left, that's such a small part. And if you start cutting, Cheryl, you mentioned some of the things that you start cutting. You don't buy new buses. You don't do maintenance projects that I can tell you that I work in the industrial maintenance field, and we see the trends of when major corporations cut back on their maintenance and upkeep, it inevitably comes back to cost more than it would have to have maintained it in the beginning. So I just think that's an important concept for everybody to sort of grasp, is that yes, it's a large budget in terms of what we as individuals and businesses would make, but the piece that we can really maneuver is not that large.
Well, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cheryl, but when we talk about basic aid, right, it's determined by our membership. And so it doesn't mean that half of what we get from the state, we can just do whatever we want to, because there are staffing ratios that we have to meet. And so a lot of that, it'd be hard to say exactly what percentage you really have discretion for, but I mean, the state funds us to meet standards of quality. And so you have to have, the principal, you have to have the librarian, you have to have, certain, pupil-teacher ratios. So even there, right, I mean, that's a lot of money that, even though they don't say for these, $2 million, you have to hire principals, it's in a big chunk, but then you expect it to also run the school division according to those state requirements. And when it comes to the fund balance, I think, again, there is sometimes that misperception that we basically, at the beginning of the year, say, let's budget with a $3 million fund balance. That's not really how that works. It's simply because we don't really know what, again, close to 80%, is people. And so we don't know in March what our payroll is going to be in the fall. And as you said, we can't go over, right? And so generally speaking, that it's more likely that someone will retire at the higher step, and then you bring in new people that are at a lower step. Everyone else moves up that step. So the reason that the fund balance then goes up is because we're very careful to not budget irresponsibly. And so then as you actually find out what payroll is, then that's what generates, okay, payroll is this much less. And then that builds up that fund balance. So it's not an intentional, budget item that's put in. Let's put in $3 million left over. We have a balanced budget, but then you have these items that just end up not being as much as you had to project because, again, you can't go over by law.
Yeah, and the supervisors have been very generous in the past of allowing us to use that money if we had a one-time expenditure, a boiler or something that went down. And so they've been very cooperative with us on that. This may not be legally possible, but is there a way that we could word contracts that would say we're going to write the contract so that if in June the state legislature comes up with where we can do the 7%, that the 7% would then be retroactive back, but then do we lose our 2% in matching state funds if we start out the year with you're shaking your head yes. So I'm assuming we're losing our 2% if we word it that way, maybe?
Based on my conversations with most, with other school districts that are going in this route, they will either say that they issue new contracts or they issue a contract addendum, which again, it's paperwork that goes to everyone. The fiscal year starts July 1. So, if the budget is there and you end up giving a 7% raise, I would think, again, that's also more than likely because the state would give the state funds for it. So it all depends on, what the state compensation supplement is. But I'm not sure that we can issue contracts with a just in case so that we don't have to redo that.
What scares me is that knowing the brave men and women in the state legislature, they'll probably choose to just do nothing and go with what was approved last year. That's the fear that I have.
Yeah, one reason that I think that they'll at least make some attempt is because both sides want something, right? And so that's the politics of it. The Senate, wants more education funding. Certainly, Governor Youngkin wants more in tax cuts. The revenue is there for both, right? So I think there may be a balancing act there, but until we know what that is, right? So, but we had that conversation today, right? They could theoretically just sit and do nothing, but then I think nobody gets anything they want. And so they have an incentive, at least in this case, both sides to maybe how far they move in each other's direction, I don't know, but I'm hopeful. But we can't do budget with Oscar's hopeful.
What do we budget in every year for our technology, for Chromebooks, iPads, such things like that?
Yeah, so you're talking about the digital conversion initiative. Yeah, I think that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million a year.
I'm looking at Greg. I was going to say 4.5 million, so I think we're pretty close.
Right. So because it all, originally there's conversations with the Board of Supervisors, I think we're in that neighborhood. Depends on, what the latest edition of the Chromebooks cost. What I will say though is that not the Chromebook initiative, the digital conversion initiative was very much coordinated with the Board of Supervisors. So there were lots of conversations with leadership in the county where statements were made, similar, I don't have the quote, but in the spirit of it, well, if we locally fund this technology initiative, this learning initiative involving technology, we don't then want to see that, oh, a couple of years down the road, you shift that money elsewhere. You use it for this and this only, right? So not that's not a legal provision, but I will certainly say that in those conversations, when that initiative was developed, because and it's a great question. It's been raised on numerous occasions, right? Why can't we just use the digital conversion money? There was a clear understanding that because many technology initiatives, many learning initiatives that involve this type of technology funding are often funded with grant money, and people then struggle to get equipment replaced. That in Rockingham County, we said, if we want to do this well, it has to be here in a way that we can count on replacements happening. You know, as Chromebooks, for example, you know, the lease runs out, we get a new lease and get additional Chromebooks. And so that was actually quite unusual to have a fully locally funded initiative like that. But it was with that understanding in those conversations. We're asking county taxpayers for $4.5 million a year to fund technology. And it's not then the intent at the time, this isn't in any rules, but it was the intent to fund it for that purpose, not for something else.
Do you happen to have the number, or can you bring this back to the board at some time, of how much we spend on the elementary level with iPads in that 4.5 million?
Based on the fact that every student gets a device, I mean, I can get you the exact number, but I'd estimate it'd be about a third, maybe a little bit more, depending, because again, Chromebooks aren't as expensive as, you know, other laptops would have been. There's some iPads at the lower grade levels, so it might be a little bit more than a third, but no, at the higher grade levels, it's a Chromebook. Yep. Correct. So it's what, K-2 is iPads, 3 through 5 is Chromebook.
And it's a one-to-one, one iPad for each student. They don't take them home, but they have
Right,
accessibility,
they don't
right?
take the Chromebooks home either in 3 through 5, right?
Grades 6 through 12 can take that.
Mhm. But in the elementary levels, it's still a one-to-one ratio. We have one for each student.
Correct.
And then do we see that number? Basically, is it when we approve the lease each year? So we have that number, and it gets presented to us before approval. Yeah, that's what I thought that number was. I just want to make sure. Mhm. Board members, any further questions? Dr. Scheichel, did you want feedback from us during the meeting tonight, or how
No,
do you
you
want us to
can
proceed?
provide me with feedback individually, maybe. Again, I think unless there are other changes, on the 27th, you'll get a presentation about the superintendent's recommended budget, but it's likely going to, unless we hear something from Richmond, right? That's also possible, that there are conversations behind the scenes that, you know, sometimes it's shared in superintendent's meetings, like which direction this might be going. But for us at this point, where we are is 5% raise allows us to do the assistant salary adjustment. And then if additional money becomes available, you increase the 5% raise, you know, up to 7, depending on how much you get. And only then do you fill out other priorities, or it's a 7% raise across the board. And the first priority, if additional money becomes available, is the assistant adjustment. and other priorities are only filled after that can be taken care of. So you can, again, those are some thoughts about that to provide some feedback so that in my presentation, I can reflect, what individual members of the board are thinking.
We can have some conversation, Dr. Shackle, you and I, but right now I lean towards the 7% option. Recognizing that if there's additional money that comes available, that those adjustments and other priorities would be filled in order of priority.
And I'd be
But-
surprised if there wasn't an adjustment
Yeah,
on
but
state budget.
we can
Yeah.
talk more about that.
Okay.
I found that interesting, and maybe you and I will have more conversation, because I would lean more towards the salary adjustment first, and then the 5% raise and the salary adjustment over the 7% raise, because the salary adjustment for assistants is going towards a much lower rate of pay. And 7%, 2% difference in the assistants is not very much. 7% or 5% of not much is very not much. Whereas the higher paid staff will get more money. So that would be my thinking. I'd almost like to see us do a salary adjustment in each budget season for the lower threshold.
I've made that argument for many years, Ms. Lohr, about helping those who are down lower on the scale. It is my primary concern lays in our ability to retain and continue to recruit teachers. I certainly want to do all I can for those assistants, and I think depending upon where that number would come in, we could look at going even further than what's in the proposal. But I hear you, and I have made that argument on numerous occasions. 2% of 30,000 is more than 2% of 15. I get it. And this is the quandary that our state legislature has consistently placed us in over a 20+ year period, right? And we've dealt with this many times, and Mr. Falk and I have used the analogy that it becomes like a Sophie's choice. You don't want to cut anything that's so desperately needed, but that's sometimes what we have to do.
And that made me think of another, you brought up a great point in retaining and competing. With our lower paid positions, are we going to be okay as minimum wage increases? Will both of these budgets?
Well, you see, for example, the $12 to $13. And I will say, as you know, over the last few years, it's not that we're now saying, oh, we have these scales that are just out of sync with surrounding divisions, right? As you know, we made significant changes to the clerical scale. We've adjusted bus drivers. There's some other scales. So every year there's an effort to look at the ones that really are at a low level, and then to make sure that we adjust those. So this is not the first time. Again, you remember the discussion around the clerical scale, I think 3-4 years ago, where we did the exact same thing. And again, I would personally be very surprised. So again, this isn't where we would leave and say, oh, our assistants aren't going to get an adjustment. It would be highly unusual, but that would be basically, ultimately, we have to figure out how to balance it first. I'm fairly confident that that money is going to be there to do both. But for budget purposes, we have to do one, right?
Any further questions?
No, but we thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Cheryl Mast.
Yes, thank you
and
both.
the executive team too. So Larry, Michelle, and Doug, they've spent hours going through school requests. You saw the original, millions of dollars that we knew are going to be above what we can do, but going through every single request and determining what the highest priorities are. So that's a huge team effort. And we do nothing without Cheryl saying, yep, we can do that.
Thank you very much. And we'll definitely be in contact. Board members, the upcoming VSBA conferences and workshops, as well as the financial review and attendance report, are in your folders for your review. That concludes the information items for tonight, and we will go to school board questions and comments, and we'll start with Mr. Breeden.
Thank you. I have nothing more sinister to add.
Thank you, Mr. Breeden. Dr. McQuilkin?
I would just like to thank Dr. Scheichel for naming all the teachers. Thank you. I think that was very important, and I want to reiterate how glad I am that you did that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Mr. Falk? Thank you. Mr. Cross?
Dr. Scheichel, would you share just briefly the process that our WRE teachers go through and the background searches and everything they go through so the public can know?
WRE is really, we have to be very careful with the terminology here. So what Rockingham County Public Schools provide is release time. So we provide time during the school day for students with parent permission to leave school property. And then based on that parent permission, they participate in that programming. Now, we do not do background checks as a school division on WRE employees. That would be for the organization to do.
Have there been any incidences?
You mean of the any instances?
Has there been any complaints, incidents of children
No,
ever being hurt by any WRE?
I'm not aware of complaints. They also wouldn't really come to us. They would come to the organization that provides that programming. So again, I want to be very careful, right? There are a number of legal reasons why we don't get involved in providing that opportunity. We simply provide time. That's our role.
Has the division had any has any kid ever been hurt at WRE? I guess, I mean, we would know that information. It wouldn't be hid from us.
I'd have to check. I mean, you know, that program has been in place for a long time. Has someone, you know, hurt? That depends on what we define there, right? So that an activity twist someone's ankle, right? I don't think that's what we're talking about. So
No, I'm talking,
right.
since
Yep.
you've been, I guess since you've been superintendent, has there ever been an incident where a parent's made a complaint where a child's been sexually assaulted in the care of a WRE worker?
I'm not aware of such a complaint.
And if that did happen, you would be aware?
Likely, again, it's a WRE activity, so the students aren't on school property and they're not in our care, right? But so that would come to WRE. Now, if we did become aware of it, obviously, you know, we would be mandated reporters of suspected child abuse.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So again, I don't want to say, I haven't handled any, I'm not aware of any, right? So
And if there was
I want to be very careful.
Okay, and if there was a sexual assault case on a child, the sheriff's office would definitely tell the school that this happened at WRE. I can tell you that.
I would think so.
Straightforward, I can
Yeah,
tell you that.
Mr.
In
Cross,
terms of
if I
sharing
might-
that
if I might
information
add,
fairly.
I'm not aware of any in my 23 years. And the community support for that program has been, again, to my experience, so overwhelmingly supportive of it. And I don't know that that would be the case if there were really bad things happening.
Okay,
We've become aware of it. But again, I don't want to give an absolute answer like this is how it's happened, because again, I've not heard anything that I can remember in the 6 years I've been here in this position.
okay. Thank you, appreciate it, thank you. The second thing I had tonight, I would like, I've talked with a couple board members and I reached out to Mr. Folk here recently, and I would like to, if the school board would be okay with this, to direct the superintendent to look into what the cost would be for us to pilot a dual immersion program starting in the 23-24 school year. So if we were to pilot a dual immersion program in one of our schools, what would be that cost? And if the superintendent would, could bring that information back to us, not the next one, I think the second one maybe in April would be fine. But if we could have that information on what that cost would be, because if we do start up a dual immersion program and our numbers are around 20% or probably more of our Latino population in Rockingham County Public Schools. So our numbers are continuing to grow, and we want them to grow. But this program is vital for a lot of their success. And as we look at the city, they've had theirs for 13 years. And it would be nice for us to at least look into this, find out how much it's going to cost us in the budget, to look at that going forward, what it would cost for at least one of our schools to at least pilot the program in the first year or two, and get that up and running. So if the board would be in agreement to direct the superintendent, I'm not asking for a vote tonight on this or anything, but if we could at least direct him to get us some numbers and what that would look like in starting that program up. I guess I'm asking the board tonight, are you in agreement to be able to at least let Dr. Scheichel begin that process of finding out what it would cost us?
Yes, I think
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. Yeah, gather some information and maybe if you could give us an update in a meeting or two about dual immersion and what that looks like and what that would look like in Rockingham County Public Schools. That sound good?
Yeah.
Would that be? And what kind of budget implications that would have?
My turn?
Oh,
Because
I was waiting.
You've completed? Okay. No, I don't want to.
Okay, was that everything? Okay, yeah.
Sure. We've, dual immersion program is a fantastic idea, right? So this isn't the first time that topic has been raised. We talked about it 3 or 4 years ago because some of our schools approached us in terms of, hey, we would love to pilot or have a dual immersion program. What it would cost depends on how it would really depend on the school, how many classes per grade level there are. Just to give you, again, one of the schools that had said that they would be interested, it was Lacey Spring Elementary. And of course, Lacey Spring Elementary, in many grade levels, there are 2 classes per grade level. You'd really have to know how many families are actually interested to have their child in dual immersion. So let's just say you have 40 students at Lacey Spring in a grade level. And that means currently you have 2 teachers with 20 students each. So if only 10 families were interested in having their kids in dual immersion, then you'd have the dual immersion group, and then you'd have 30 kids left. So with 30 kids, you still need 2 teachers. So in that scenario, you would then have to add a bilingual teacher who can actually teach in both languages, right? So you add 1 position and that teacher would teach those. So that would be an additional teacher. If you have a school where you have, now, of course, if the split is 20-20, right, then you may not need an additional teacher. If you have a bilingual teacher, now one of the current teachers would have to go elsewhere because, if they're not bilingual, they couldn't teach there. So you'd have to move that teacher somewhere. And then the bilingual teacher could teach the dual immersion. Again, that's for 1 grade level. So may not cost you a teacher at all if you have a place for the other teacher, but that would require it to be a 20-20 split. And it makes it a little bit easier in larger schools because there are multiple approaches to dual immersion. So that could be one teacher that can teach in both languages. It could also be two teachers, one who simply, but you have the dual immersion group, one that teaches exclusively in English. So they teach one group in the morning and then they switch and then they teach the other group in the afternoon. And you have a Spanish-speaking teacher who's endorsed to teach, who has the reverse. So they have basically, let's say 40 kids and they switch them off. Again, depends on the numbers. It's a little bit easier there because if you have a school where you have 5 classes in each grade level, now the numbers of students are so high that you may actually get interest from a significant enough number of families that you actually have to have a lottery, right? So it's easier to say, we'll do that somewhere where you limit it with a lottery rather than to say, oh, we need to hire an extra teacher for 10 kids. And then we have 2 other classes where you have 15 each with a low class size. But then you also have to think about, are you then, if you go down that road of a bilingual teacher, are you then able to find a bilingual teacher for kindergarten, for whichever grade you start in, kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, right? So even to do it in that school, now you're talking 6 teachers, right? So it really depends on the specific circumstances. What it would take is, certainly I've had the conversation with our EL supervisor, and her recommendation to me was that if RCPS wanted to start something, her recommendation would be 2 years out. Certainly if the board wants to have a pilot and then think about it a year out, those are all things that are possible. In terms of cost, it really depends on the, yeah. So you'd want the pilot in 24, 25? Okay, yeah, because otherwise there'd be budget implications now, right? So, but again, on the perfect circumstances, you don't have to, if you have room for that teacher, or you already have someone who's bilingual, right? But that's the difficulty. We already have trouble finding many foreign language teachers. I know that, and I can't speak for the city, it's a wonderful program, right? But the recruitment has to extend to, Texas, Puerto Rico, Florida. They're really all over the country with an existing program strong. I will say this though, just to repeat that, when we had the conversation a few years ago, there isn't anyone in the room who said, dual immersion, it'd be awesome to have. The question becomes, and at the time we said, particularly for the schools that proposed it, very difficult to pull off. And if you don't do it really well, it's going to hurt you. And so we'd have to have confidence that you can find the staff to pull it off. If you can, wonderful experience for any student that's in it. There's no argument. And there was no one in that room who said, oh, that's not a good program to have. I'd love to have it. Our estimation at the time was, especially for a small school, really, really difficult to pull off because of how the numbers work out. Now, we'll just throw one more piece in. So when we talk about Lacey Spring, for example, right? So right now, 2 classes in each grade level. A year from now, that may very well be 3, right? Because we're talking Broadway expansion. We have a number of schools, and Lacey isn't necessarily one of those, but we have a number of schools where you have 28 students, so you have to split it. So they have class sizes of 13, 14 in a class. The large schools, you always run into kind of the upper limit, so they have 22, 24. And one of the ways you can balance this out, where you have, you could actually reduce. You can add 20 kids to that grade level without hiring a teacher, right? And so redistricting can be used to balance out class sizes across the county. But with Broadway expansion, you will actually likely add another class in each grade level at Lacey Spring. Okay. And so that, again, it becomes an easier conversation to have, right? So certainly, again, absolutely worth investigating. First step, feasibility analysis. What it would cost depends on the setup itself. Are you going to do English-speaking teacher, Spanish-speaking teacher, and they flip? Are we more confident that you can find bilingual teachers? But then you have to kind of run it through because you can't do 40 kids one year, and then the next year you only have one bilingual teacher, you got to kick half the kids out again, right? So
Right,
there are a lot of things to think about. Wonderful idea, and yeah, feasibility study would be first, and then a pilot a year from now. Certainly worth looking at.
I just happened to sit with the superintendent for Winchester when I went down to Richmond last month, and he was telling me, so if you could reach out to him, because he was telling me of a group that you have to get in touch with, and they help a lot to provide these services. So if you could, you're a professional in this, but if you don't mind at least reaching out to the superintendent of Winchester, at least ask him that group he was telling me about, because I can't remember. He left shortly thereafter, but thank you for looking into this and getting us something back.
Jonathan Van Hukelum, I think is his name. I just
Yeah, he
spent
knew you.
Yep, yeah, just spent some time with him
He was a
in
runner.
San Antonio. Yep.
Dr. Scheichel, I know that you've investigated the telehealth incident. Would you like to provide an update on that?
Yeah, so Dr. Alderfer has checked with Broadway High School to get more details, and it's on the agenda for the executive team to discuss tomorrow.
Thank you very much. And do we have any students here tonight? I know we do. And I promised you guys a short meeting. It wasn't 8 minutes, I'm sorry. But we'd like to welcome you guys and thank you guys for coming on spring break, no less, to knock out your government requirements. So thank you all for being here. And Dr. Scheichel, did you have any other comments you wanted to make?
Nope, that's good.
That concludes our board member question and comment period. We have reason to enter into closed session. Board members, do I have a motion to enter closed session?
I've got my laptop.
Do you have it?
I have it.
Okay.
I move that the board enter a closed meeting to discuss and consider the following pursuant to the provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711. A1. Specific public officers, appointees, or employees for the purpose of considering such individuals' assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation.
Thank you, Dr. McQuilkin. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Falk. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, before we enter closed session, I do want to thank everyone for coming tonight, especially during spring break, the beautiful day that it was, now that we're finally getting snow for spring break. You didn't even have to cancel school today. How awesome was that? Thank you all. Have safe travels home, but all those in favor of going to closed session, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We are in closed session. Thank you all.